Hi, today on Pastry Aid we will explain the hows and whys of making a tender and flaky pie dough. Basically, there are 4 ingredients that go into a pie dough: flour, fat, water, and salt. In order to make a tender dough, we need to keep gluten from forming. One way we do that is by surrounding flour pieces in fat. Basically, gluten is a protein formed in flour when water is added to it. So the fat we use in this process should have almost no water in it. So the best fat to use is vegetable shortening or lard. Now when you surround the flour in fat, you're going to keep the flour pieces from connecting, which is a process called shortening. Shortening is often used in pastry when you want to create a non-chewy or crumbly dough, like we want to do with pies. So let's see it in action. We have here a bowl of flour and salt, and we're going to take cold shortening, cold because we don't want it to melt. We're basically going to rub it between our hands until the mixture resembles a coarse cornmeal, and that will make sure all the fat is surrounding the flour. Okay, let's now talk about how to make a flaky pie dough. I'm drawing again some flour circles. Basically, what we want to create are layers of fat and flour. Now, the fat crystals are still surrounding the pieces of flour, but we also now want to create sheets of fat that will sit between layers of flour. When it bakes, it is these sheets of fat layered between the flour that will create your flakes. Now, depending on the type of fat you're using, there will be water in it. So for instance, butter has water in it. You also eventually add water to your dough. As the crust cooks, heat is added and turns the water into steam. That steam pushes up on the layers of flour, creating the flakes. Now, some of the steam will release through the top, which sometimes causes cracks on the top of your pie dough. This is why we want to vent the top of the pie crust before baking. When it is done baking and the water has turned to steam, you will end up with a flaky pie crust. Now let's see this in action. We're going to cut cold butter in about 1/2 inch cubes, and we're basically going to put that into our flour and shortening mixture. We're going to toss that to keep the butter pieces separate. Next, we are going to use a pastry cutter to actually cut the cold butter into the flour. Now we don't want to fully incorporate the butter, otherwise we will not end up with the sheets of flour and butter. After you've done this for a couple of minutes, you will see that the butter is different sizes. The butter in my right hand is too big, while the butter pieces in my left hand are good. So I want to keep cutting until I get slightly smaller pieces of butter, about the size of a pea. I'm going to finish by breaking up any large pieces of butter with my hand. Now we're going to add our cold water. Cold so it does not melt the butter. We're going to toss gently and not stir vigorously to reduce forming gluten in the dough. Once the dough holds together, we're ready for the next step. We are going to elongate the fat strands using a process called phrasing. With the palm of our hand, we're going to scrape down on the dough, creating long strands of butter. This will create nice long flakes. Do not overwork the dough, only go over it once with the palm of your hand. Again, you don't want to create too much gluten or make the dough too hot. We will finish with the rest of the dough. Once you are done, shape the dough into a disc, wrap it in plastic wrap, and let it sit for several hours or overnight to relax the gluten. So we wanted to bake off some crust so you could see what it looks like. You can see all the flakes in this close-up shot, and in the background you see all the crumbs which represent the tenderness. We hope you've learned a little more about the science behind a good pie crust, and happy baking.